Thank you so much, Kelly, for being here.
Nice
and you got the call and you were willing and able to come and join us. And you have been a part of this story from the get-go as well. I mean, you and Graham have worked together for 15 years. You were part of the demerger from the BHP side. So we've really got the benefit of hearing the entire of the journey from you here today as well.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So
glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit about the origin story of South32. What was the original opportunity or insight that made the business case so compelling?
Well, as you know, we were demerged from BHP. At the time, BHP were quite focused on sort of large-scale tier one assets, and there was a lot of assets in their portfolio that didn't fit. So there was an opportunity to sort of take those smaller assets, or in some cases, they were sizable but not necessarily part of the sort of core strategy of BHP, put them in the demerged South32 entity and give them an enhanced focus, which is something that we've been able to do over the last nearly 10 years.
Yeah, happy anniversary to that end. It is nearly 10.
Next year. Yep.
How has the organisation changed over the last decade? If you could talk us through some of the key strategic shifts or evolutions, what's different now to maybe the hypotheses that you had 10 years ago?
I think, there's been a huge focus on the last decade of moving to, with the energy transition moving towards commodities that are focused on that transition. A lot of our businesses are quite low margin. They were challenged, so we sort of approached it. Our strategy is sort of three things: optimise our base business and get our base business running really well. That then gave us the cash flow to sort of invest in both brownfield growth opportunities for our base business, but also in developing new opportunities like our Hermosa project in the US, and adding copper to our portfolio, which we did recently through an acquisition in Chile.
Absolutely. And you have sustainability as a good chunk of your portfolio. You're very connected into that topic. I'm interested in your observations. We just heard from Jake and Leanne a moment ago, just how much ESG is front and centre of conversations, even notably for them in the last 12 months compared to, say, a year ago. I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about the evolution of that, both from a priority but equally from a commerciality standpoint over the last decade.
Yeah, climate's obviously been front and centre for quite a period of time. I think equally so has social performance, community development, community investment and the like, particularly in a lot of the locations that we work. I think the last year, what I would say I felt a big shift in is nature.
Okay.
And climate being part of nature in respect of emissions, but there's a real focus on biodiversity, a real focus on water. And
where's that driven from, can I ask?
It's driven from a variety of stakeholders.
Okay.
It's driven from investors, it's driven from government through policy, and it's driven from communities. People understand, I think, broadly that they need commodities, for their mobile phones, for their cars, for their wind turbines, for solar panels, but equally they want companies to dig up these minerals in a really responsible way. And the industry has probably a mixed reputation in that space, and the increased focus, from our perspective, is welcome, because we do need to dig up these commodities if we're going to have a future and we're going to go forward in this energy transition, but we absolutely don't want to do it at the expense of, the future of the environment, of flora, fauna, water. So, I think the enhanced focus is right, and I think most mining companies are rising to the challenge.
Yep. And from a nature standpoint, that is an example of a more recent evolution. How does that start to change some of the conversations that are happening around the leadership table at South32 as you think about the evolving kind of goalposts or focus of the social performance and ESG side of things?
Yeah, it's always a balance, right? Like often the conversation is you can have the greenest mine on the planet, but if it doesn't make any money, it's not going to survive. So, often the conversation is around how do you minimise your impact? How do you still create value? Because you need economic value, not just for the company, but also for your stakeholders. You're paying royalties, you're paying income tax to governments, you're investing in community. So it's just a balance. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to, you need to achieve that balance, because if you can't, you shouldn't be there.
Your South32 is renowned for the significant transformation that you've undergone, and core to that has been the ability to attract and retain diverse talent. Can you speak a little bit about how you've built a culture around the leadership table, but equally inside the organisation, that's allowed you to do that and really have talent attraction as a competitive advantage in what you were going about doing?
Sure. I mean, we've got a couple of things. We had the benefit of a lot of experienced people came across on demerger from BHP, and BHP was a great organisation to work for. And then a lot of people came across or joined after. I didn't actually come on the demerger. I came about a year later because Graham contacted me and said, I've got this vision for this business. It's going to be really exciting. And it was sort of like the opportunity to do things different, be a little bit more nimble, be a little bit more agile. We're still operating in 10 countries, so it's an international portfolio. We had a good balance sheet, so we had the ability to really look at M&A, BD opportunities, which is exciting. At the time, the other companies were sort of not really that engaged. They were more focused on getting more out of their installed capital. So I think there was a lot of excitement for people coming across to see what it could achieve, and Graham's the kind of leader for anybody that's been around him that sort of ignites that enthusiasm in people. Plus, it's just, we had this sort of real strong vision to do things in the right way, and I think we've done a lot. We bat out of our league in respect of the dollars that we invest in community, as against when you line it up for what we make. And I think we have a good reputation in the communities that we work in. So I think all those things coupled together, people were just sort of wanted to come along for the journey and see what we could create and achieve. And so far, I think we've done pretty well.
So you mentioned there that part of the vision was the opportunity to come and work a little bit differently, be able to be a bit more nimble. Are they some of the things you'd say are inherent advantages of being a mid-tier miner, or is that something that's absolutely still a differentiator between what South 32 are maybe relative to other mid-tiers?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say we're more agile and more nimble. I mean, there's definitely areas where we can improve, and we're too process-driven like most mining companies that are full of engineers. But yeah, I mean, there's just a sense of enthusiasm. It's a business that's got a lot of aging assets, and if we can't transform the portfolio, we would have sort of shriveled to nothing. And what we've been able to do is, like, we've got assets that are fully operational. We've got assets that will head to closure in the next 10 years. We've got assets that are being developed, and we've got an exploration pipeline. So wherever you want to work in that sort of continuum of the mining industry, we can offer that to you. And I think that's exciting for people.
The banner of our conversation today is obviously the transformational change required to support the energy transition. I'm interested from your perspective, 9 years in, roughly, the organisation, what's been the most difficult part of the transformation process so far? And what do you think has been the single most important thing you've done as a business, whether that was a strategic focus or a cultural tenet that you made a core part of how you work? So what's been the biggest challenge, and what do you think has put you in good stead to overcome or tackle that challenge?
The biggest challenge, without a doubt, has been safety. So we've had a number of fatalities in our business in that 9 years, the bulk of them having been in Africa. One of the most recent ones was in Colombia. As a leader, you never want to wake up and find out that someone didn't go home to their family. It's a challenge for the industry, but it's been a challenge for us. We've had a huge focus on trying to improve our safety performance. We're sort of all aligned around this idea right now of what we call our safety guarantee, which is like an internal concept to effectively, it's like a risk assessment. So my lawyers, when it came out, they were like, oh, the guarantee, you can't guarantee people's safety. You can't, like if you get on a plane, you can't guarantee that you're going to make it to the other side. And what it's more about is to say, before you start a job, can you guarantee that you and whoever you're working with will be able to complete this job safely? So it's like your ability to triage. So it's that sort of trigger in your mind, and the fact that it creates chronic unease, discomfort, is what we want. Because if that's what we need to do to try and get people to really stop and think before they work, and yeah, to make sure that everyone does go home, that's absolutely it. And remind me, sorry, the second part of your question.
Second part, and the guarantee might be part of it, but just anything you think has been a very deliberate choice, whether that is a strategic focus or a cultural tenet that has held you in such good stead to make the transformation and to be able to take on some of the challenges that have confronted you as you've been on that journey?
Probably sounds a bit cliche, but I would say that just being purpose-driven. Like, everything we do from the board down, like I look after COSEC, so I spend a lot of time with the board. The focus on being purpose-driven, adhering to like decisions being like made through the lens of our purpose is paramount. So we don't make decisions that we think will, that we're not willing to stand behind. And a lot of people say that, but I personally feel like South32 is a company that lives and breathes that, both their purpose and their values. So that's what I would say I think sort of sets us apart for me anyway.
You mentioned earlier your portfolio extends to 10 countries. So you've got a good perspective to pick up on a theme we've been exploring this morning, which is around Australia's competitiveness and what, if anything, can be done to enhance it. I'm particularly eager to talk a little bit about the work that's been happening with Hermosa and the kind of unique situation that's been developed, the regulatory framework that you've been given to fast track. Can you speak a little bit about, because a lot of people said you don't get involved in that project, you'll have a nightmare on your hands with regards to trying to get this approved and get this up and running. You've had a totally different experience. You're a pilot and a case study of a different way of approaching projects like this. Can you talk to us about that US example and maybe lessons that could be applicable for the Australian context?
Yeah, sure. So it's called FAST 41, but interestingly, a FAST is an acronym. And so it's not meant to be a faster process. What it's actually, it's like a dashboard, for want of a better word, where the government, the White House has set up sort of this centralised permitting council. And we were the first mining company to get on FAST 41 in the US, and they effectively coordinate all the federal permitting agencies to work together. So on that dashboard, you effectively all the agencies and the mining company agree the timeframes. It's visible to everybody and everybody's held to account. I was in DC in May, and like lots of the government, like senators were sort of like, does it do what it says on the tin? And we were like, so far, absolutely it does actually. So we've had a really great experience so far with the permitting for that project. And for those that are familiar with, to your point, with the US permitting system, it historically has a bad reputation. So, it is something that the Australian government, I know in various conversations, they have been to the US and have been working with the White House and having a look at it as an option or something similar here. But it has been beneficial for us.
And is it something now that the US are expanding, given the success, by the sounds of it, of the early stages of what's happening with Hermosa? Like, is that going to be something we're going to see become more of the norm in the US jurisdiction? That ability to ideally make permitting more efficient and coordinate that interagency approach?
Absolutely, and it's not just limited to mining. So it's in the US, it's broader than mining. It's for projects that meet certain criteria around national interest and the like. So our view is it's quite, the way that it's been implemented, it's quite bipartisan. As you would know, the US are very focused on securing critical minerals supply, and they're very focused, both governments, on this. So I think it will continue to play quite a significant role in projects there.
And probably coming back to your perspective on the relative competitiveness of Australia, any observations from the touch point that you have or the vantage point that you have across that many jurisdictions on areas where you think we need to have a critical conversation about or need to be doing more with regards to?
I think part of the challenge here is like the federal and state system. Obviously, we're going through an approval in Western Australia at the moment. We've been going through that for nearly 5 years. We actually took a significant write-down on that asset recently because of, partially because of the amount of time the permitting has taken. And, what we saw a lot in that is there's, on greenhouse gas emissions, there's federal regulation and then there's state regulation. So I think our key message to the government would be more around how do we unify. I think the intent is right and everybody wants to contribute to the intent, particularly around greenhouse gas, around emissions reduction, around biodiversity protection and so on. I think you'll find that most, mining companies are very aligned to the intent. It's just how do we get a sort of unified, aligned system so we're all, working towards the same thing and all working within the same framework.
And aside from the FAST 41 example in the US, is there any other jurisdictions you'd point to and say that's an example of something we could be looking at or should see as a point of light for this done more effectively or efficiently?
I I mean, I spent a long time in Africa, particularly in West Africa, what they do there. But I mean, mining was in its infancy in that point in time. They do a lot of mineral development agreements that they actually, and the state of Western Australia has historically done them as well, where they effectively pass the mining development agreements into legislation,
yep.
particularly given the significant capital outlay that goes into mining projects, the many decades of investment and how long it takes to ramp them up. It gives investors a level of certainty, and it means, you know, the rules of the game are not changing at the whim of the change of the government, because you have, you know, legislative stability. There's pros and cons to that model, but there's you know, that's definitely another model that has some benefits.
Before we let you go, I'd love your perspective on the challenge and transformation that lies ahead. So the major issues, any observations around where mining's heading and what it means you're beginning to have more conversations about around the leadership and board table at South 32 than maybe you were 2 years ago?
I think generally mining's getting harder. Because we need, you know, we know in copper and zinc and a lot of these commodities, we're probably heading for a supply shortfall. And to get people to invest, they need to be incentivised. Obviously, governments can invest and they've got a different cost of capital, but it's getting harder and harder to make decent returns, and the only way you make those is with getting investors' money. So I think a lot of what's coming is just how we better balance. I mean, a lot of the sort of deposits are becoming more remote, deeper, more difficult to mine, and then we've got the overlay of much more complexity from a sustainability perspective, which is right. I'm not suggesting it's not, but it's just how we strike that balance so that we minimise impact but can still provide these commodities in a way that gets investors, you know, a decent return.
And relative to that, because that paints a very challenging picture, are you an optimist about navigating that? What is something that gives you a sense of belief around the ability to tackle that, whether that's innovation that you're witnessing, you know, problem-solving capability that's inside your organisation right now? What, if anything, gives you confidence that that next set of complexities and difficulties can be overcome?
I'm definitely an optimist. I mean, I've been in this industry 20 years and I'm in it because I love it. And I love it because it has such a significant impact on community and on the world. So I think, will we solve these challenges? Absolutely. There's no question in my mind we will. And I think the key to that is all of these problems require multi-stakeholder solutions. It can't be done alone. I mean, we've got a big challenge ahead of us in decarbonising our smelter in South Africa. There's no world where we can decarbonise that alone. We need to work with the South African government, the Mozambican government, because we have one there, with, you know, international finance and, you know, many different stakeholders. And, you know, a lot of people continue to say it's not possible, and maybe it's not, but we're going to give it a go.
Going to give it a go. With that closing note and that optimistic tinge in your voice, that concludes our conversation here. I think a really great shout out though around the role and importance, to conclude there, of multi-stakeholder collaboration and partnerships and problem solving, just the need to bring ingenuity and unlike minds perhaps together in order that we can create new solutions and possibilities. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us here at IMARC. Please thank Kelly O'Rourke.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Cheers.